Well, hello, everyone. 95 people are here. That's so exciting. Thank you, everyone, for attending the second annual African American Studies Teach-In. I want to try, as long as I'm chair, to have this every year. It's very important in African American or Black studies to really show what we do in our scholarship, because so many people assume or don't even think about that. So I'm so happy to here to highlight my scholars. So we're going to have 3 presenters today. Unfortunately, Assistant Professor Michael Mitchell won't be with us. He's feeling ill, so I told him to go lay down. And I want the rest of you all to stay healthy as much as you can. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Piper Kendricks Williams. I'm Chair of African American Studies, and I'm jointly appointed in English and African American Studies. We're going to have each presenter present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A at the end. I'm going to introduce our presenters. So I'm going to introduce them in the order that they'll be presenting. So first, Dr. Maxwell Berkey is a visiting assistant professor of African American Studies and Political Science at TCNJ. He teaches courses on American politics, race, and democracy. His research explores how American resistant movements challenge narratives of national identity. Then Dr. Zakiya Adair will present. She's an associate professor jointly appointed in African American Studies and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. She teaches courses on Black cultural production, Black feminist theory, pop culture, and pop music. Dr. Adair's areas of research revolve around the Black American cultural history in the areas of Black internationalism and transatlantic Black expressive culture, and Black feminism in the US and abroad. Dr. Leigh-Anne Francis will go third. She's also an associate professor with a dual appointment in the departments of African American Studies and Women and Gender Studies at the College of New Jersey. She teaches courses on the history of mass incarceration, African American women, and queer and trans people of color in the United States. Her research explores the intersections of sexism, racism, poverty, crime, and work, while situating Black women in the history of mass incarceration. And I'll also introduce Professor Michael Mitchell, even though he can't join us. And I'm going to see if we can maybe reschedule his talk sometime. But Michael Mitchell is an assistant professor in the departments of African American Studies and Criminology. He regularly teaches courses on race, crime, and justice, policing, youth criminalization, and social justice. His research interests are primarily in the areas of returning citizens, youth justice, police and community relations, and the impact of incarceration on families. And he was going to present on school as a carceral site. And so a little plug, in the fall, Professor Mitchell is going to teach a class on school to prison pipeline. So if you're students on this call, you can definitely hear so much more about what he was presenting on today in his class next semester. So I'll get the spotlight off me, and hopefully it can get onto Max. Right. And Dr. Burkey will present. Thank you all. Make sure you mute.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. So let me introduce the topic of patriotism and the African American political tradition by reflecting on the patriotic underpinnings of Black History Month itself. The Black History Month, most of us are familiar with from K through 12 education, has its provenance in the post-civil rights period of American politics, following the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in the mid-1960s. This is when Black History Month receives widespread national recognition and gets mainstreamed in American life. It is also a moment characterized by renewed patriotism, mobilized in reaction to social movements like the Black Freedom Movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, which challenged America's identity as an exceptional nation, a beacon of freedom to the world. Patriotism in this moment, in this context, was marshaled as a kind of national balm to heal divisions and to rehabilitate American exceptionalism. The year 1976 is especially relevant in this context as the year of the bicentennial celebration of the American Revolution, as well as the year that Black History Month receives the imprimatur of a US president. One key focal point of the official bicentennial celebration was dubbed the American Freedom Train. It was a coal-burning steam locomotive hearkening back to the westward expansion and manifest destiny of the 19th century. The Freedom Train chugged its way across the country. It stopped in over 100 cities. It attracted over 7 million visitors, all of whom made their way through the 10 display cars on the train, showcasing hundreds of artifacts, including George Washington's copy of the US Constitution, the original Louisiana Purchase, Thomas Edison's first light bulb, and other kitschy pieces of Americana. Each train also carried a different theme: the revolution, the pioneering spirit, ingenuity, and entrepreneurialism were among the themed cars. So Freedom Train showcased a depoliticized and triumphant America, one centered around an immaculate revolutionary founding. But as the product of this post-civil rights era, the Freedom Train did make room for a spattering of Black history. So one could find Hank Aaron's baseball bat and Bob Lanier's basketball shoes and Martin Luther King Jr.'s pulpit all on display. And one of the 10 cars was devoted to the theme of diversity. My first suggestion for us today is that the bicentennial Freedom Train is not merely a historical anecdote. It is a microcosm of patriotism's ability to co-opt and curtail the Black political tradition. And we can think of it as a kind of metaphor for our post-civil rights era. The upshot of the Black freedom struggle is to add a car to the American train. But the trajectory of the train isn't altered. The tracks have already been laid down, and the train isn't re-engineered. The same old steam locomotive chugs forward. Moreover, many of us have gone to school on this Freedom Train, and Black History Month has been part of that ride. So to see this, let's take a look at President Gerald Ford's 1976 statement recognizing Black History Month. It's the first of its kind, and it is one that has been rendered by every president since, with only minor variations. So here is President Ford. Freedom and the recognition of individual rights are what our revolution was all about. They were the ideals that inspired our fight for independence, ideals that we have been striving to live up to ever since. Yet it took many years before ideals became a reality for Black citizens. The last quarter century has finally witnessed significant strides in the full integration of Black people into every area of national life. In celebrating Black History Month, we can take satisfaction from this recent progress in the realization of the ideals envisioned by our founding fathers. So let's notice a couple of points here. As with the Freedom Train, there is a nod to diversity and an acknowledgement of civic equality. But the Black experience is subsumed as an addendum to the American founding. The achievement of a modicum of civic equality for Black Americans is cast as a belated confirmation of the wisdom of founding fathers and evidence of the exceptionalism of national origins. The emphasis in Ford is placed on the inexorable realization of preordained ideals, precluding a serious acknowledgement of Black political struggle. So let's look to, and let me share with you now, a few examples that shed light on the inadequacies of this patriotic framing of the Black experience. And these are three kind of classic examples of what I call counter-patriotism, and they tend to get less attention in popular celebrations of Black History Month. So the first example comes from the tradition of Black political thought And it's a 1963 essay entitled A Talk to Teachers by James Baldwin. So here's Baldwin. What passes for identity in America is a series of myths about one's heroic ancestors. So many people really appeared to believe that the country was founded by a band of heroes who wanted to be free. That happens not to be true. What happened was that some people left Europe because they couldn't stay there any longer and had to go someplace else to make it. That's all. They were hungry, they were poor, they were convicts. Those who were making it in England did not get on the Mayflower. That's how the country was settled, not by Gary Cooper. Now, Gary Cooper was the decorated Hollywood actor of the mid-20th century. He was known especially for his roles in Westerns, films like High Noon in 1952, which lionized the rugged individualist and the heroic cowboy who brings law and order to a wayward and wild frontier. By linking the founding to the Hollywood Western, Baldwin highlights the performative dimensions of patriotism. Patriotism is made, not found. So for Baldwin, the Freedom Train doesn't document American exceptionalism, it attempts to construct it. Moreover, Baldwin strips the American founding here of the missionary idealism afforded it by President Ford. The founding wasn't a transcendent act of freedom. Rather, Baldwin reframes it with a kind of Black blues sensibility. Survival, hardship, and material interests were the impetus. The second example I want to share with you comes from the tradition of Black protest and the 1968 Summer Olympics, where Black track and field athletes Tommie Smith and John Carlos won gold and bronze. And during the medal ceremony, while the national anthem was playing, Smith and Carlos engaged in an act of symbolic protest, wearing Black socks to highlight economic hardship faced by Black communities, beads to remember victims of lynching, and Black gloves, which they raised as fists in the air while bowing their heads. Unlike Freedom Train and President Ford, each of which treated race through the lens of gradual progress, of integration, and of diversity, the raised fists of Smith and Carlos insist on recognizing the collective struggles of Black communities. The story of race is not one of gradualism, but of insurgent power exercised from below. And Smith and Carlos enact Blackness here as incommensurable with narratives of national glory. Their raised fists demonstrate solidarity with people of color around the world, suggesting a transnational understanding of power and of liberation. My final example that I want to share with you comes from the tradition of Black visual culture, and it is the artist Faith Ringgold's 1997 quilt, The Flag is Bleeding #2. And Ringgold's art explores the intersections of race, gender, and nation. And in 1970, when Ringgold first began interrogating and distorting the iconography of American patriotism, she participated in an exhibition at the Judson Memorial Church in New York City called the People's Flag Show. And she was arrested there on charges of desecration for exhibiting pieces with similar themes to the one we see here. Notice this mother's or this caretaker's bloodshot eyes, the blood emanating like tears from her eye, as well as from her breasts, dripping down to the hands and the arms of the children she embraces, suggesting the violence and loss endured by the Black mother in America, who is unable to nurture her children with any guarantee of their safety, and alluding here, right, to the intergenerational qualities of this trauma and the persistence of racial violence. Notice too that the flag bleeds into black at the bottom of the quilt, suggesting that the truth about America is found in that grimy, blood-sodden underground, not in the majestic flag that flies above. Right? So we can see that Ringgold here is contesting the arid and abstract politics of Freedom Train and President Ford. This piece brings patriotism down from the clouds of mythic idealism. It fashions a less sanitized politics, an embodied politics, one that takes full measure of the lived experience of Black America. So let's ask, what can we take away from these examples? What's the big picture? Well, deeply ingrained in American political culture is the assumption that patriotism and democracy work synergistically. The African-American political tradition questions this synergy, right? It offering resources for reimagining democracy in the counter-patriotic terms of dissent, of collective struggle, of historical memory. And let's conclude then by asking kind of why this counter-patriotism matters today. There are many ways of answering this question, but I want to leave you with one very concrete answer. And one plank of the conservative reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement today has been the effort to curtail the ways in which race is taught in American schools. And we've seen this effort accelerate and achieve legislative victories, especially over the past year or so. So let's look to one example issued by Florida's Board of Education that is emblematic of this broader reaction. So here is the text of the Florida policy. Instruction must be factual and objective and may not suppress or distort significant historical events such as the Holocaust, slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, and the contributions of women, African-American, and Hispanic people to our country. Instruction may not define American history as something other than the creation of a new nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. That's the text from Florida's Board of Education. So my final suggestion for us today, the Freedom Train, almost a half century later, still trails America's understanding of race. Like the Freedom Train's diversity car, Florida's Board of Education nods to diversity, but also like Freedom Train, this recognition of diverse contributions remains ensnared in a patriotic framework that serves to confirm the dominant myths of American nationhood. The Black experience follows through on the American founding. It doesn't transform it. And so those of us who care about racial justice, and also those of us who detect in these policies the latest iteration of a long tradition of American anti-intellectualism, need to pay heed to the counter-patriotism at the core of the Black political tradition for a couple of reasons. First, it gives us the intellectual tools necessary to discern and to denaturalize the latent ideological project inherent in these reactionary policies, like the one from Florida, which purport to only be neutral and objective. And second, this counter-patriotic ethos of Black politics offers a road forward. It asks us to think, to deepen our thinking about what constitutes a liberal education. Diversity is a crucial part of that education, but diversity isn't satisfied by the Freedom Train model, by the inclusion of individual stories and achievements of Black Americans alone. Diversity also demands a serious engagement with the ideas and the arguments of the Black political tradition. And this means that sound educational policy cannot presuppose patriotism. Rather, patriotism and American national identity must be taught as a contested and an unsettled terrain. That's my time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Max. I took so many notes. It was a great way to kick this off, sort of like troubling, you know, this idea that patriotism is something that we just should presuppose.
Right.
So I like it. Counter patriotism.
Great.
All right. So everyone write a note down so you can ask a question later. And I want to now turn the floor over to Dr. Adair.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. I'm about to share my screen, which means
we can hear
I
you.
probably won't be able to see you. So let's hope that this all works out as it should. All right, so I hope everyone can hear me and also see my screen. If someone could maybe unmute and just say yes or no, that would be.
Yes, we can see it. The pleasure
All
principle.
right.
Woohoo!
All right, thank you. Well, first I want to say, Max, that was great. And it's also super informative. So thanks for giving us some of that knowledge today. I also want to thank Dr. Williams for including me in today's teach-in. It's an honor to present with my colleagues. And I'm also happy to share with everyone today a little bit of my work. So the majority of my research and scholarship revolve around the relationship between Black culture and Black liberation movements. And I'm particularly interested in how Black people use pop culture as a way out and against oppression. But today I will share a little bit of a new piece that I'm working on Black women, hip hop feminism, and the possibilities for Black female pleasure in pop music and hip hop. So it is one of our most powerful and formative social institutions. The media shapes what we know and how we experience our socially constructed identities. Today, I want to explore Black women's cultural production in music. Specifically, I'm interested in the sonic and aesthetic transgressions with regard to respectability politics and the discourse of sexual exploitation. Put another way, I want to free Black women from the confines of discourse of Black female sexuality as deviant, and to also highlight the ways that only talking about Black female sexuality in reaction to the history of exploitation limits Black women's agency, artistry, and creativity, especially in popular culture. Studying pop music and pop culture is complex, particularly when looking at pop music that trades in racial, gender, and sexuality tropes within a capitalist structure. Historically, Black female sexuality was constructed out of a context of slavery wherein Black women were legally the property of white slave owners. Post-slavery, state attempts to further control Black bodies regulated every aspect of Black life, and the media worked in concert with the state via racist laws and regulations, and with controlling and defining racialized gender tropes that appeared everywhere, from food packaging, travel ads, cartoons, children's books, radio programming, to music, theater, and films. And of course, racist and sexist images of Black people in popular culture persist. So a little bit of history. Respectability politics is a term used to describe the social and cultural policing of Black bodies, especially Black women. But historically, it is important to note that this was an important strategy against racialized sexual violence proposed by progressive Black women for racial uplift in the late 18th and early 20th century. However, today, respectability politics are often used as a means to control and police Black pleasure, especially Black women who assert a pro-sex, sex-positive self. Thankfully, we do have a theoretical framework to understand the possibility of sexual freedom for Black women in pop music. It's hip hop feminism. Black feminist scholars Brittany Cooper, Treva Lindsay, Joan Morgan, and others define hip hop feminism as a pro-sex, sex-positive theory that draws from Black feminist epistemologies and Black queer theory. It challenges respectability politics in an effort to locate Black pleasure and Black female sexuality outside of the Mammy Jezebel tropes. This is significant because using respectability politics as a lens to understand Black female sexual agency in pop music not only creates false dichotomies between good, bad, it also traps discourse on Black desire in a heteronormative lens. The result of this narrow lens is a silencing of queer bodies of color and any bodies that do not fit into a racist, sexist hierarchy of what is considered sexy, of who gets to express desire and what desire is accepted to express. The industry has come forward slightly. There are rappers like Lil Nas X on the screen here, and also Young M.A, who are queer and commercially successful hip hop artists. But the list of commercially successful queer hip hop artists is still very, very short, too short. As a masculine shaped space, it has been very difficult for anyone outside of cis straight men to attain commercial success in rap and hip hop. For the few Black women that do rise to the top, their sexual expression is most often aggressively straight, even when they are not. For example, Cardi B and Nicki Minaj have made numerous references to the fact and statements to the fact that they like women, but when pressed for further detail or to come out as queer, both double down on being straight. Also, for years, pioneer MCs Queen Latifah and Missy Misdemeanor Elliott dealt with consistent speculation and harassment regarding their sexuality. But that which silences and discourages Black queer bodies in commercial hip hop and pop music is exactly what white female pop stars use to get ahead. They assume Black female deviant tropes as a way to appear more versatile and to project sexual independence. This is especially true for pop stars seeking to transition from virginal teen to mature woman. Madonna, Miley Cyrus, Iggy Azalea, these are just a few of the many, many examples. All of the Kardashians. So this is called blackfishing. Blackfishing is the embodiment of racial essentialism by white figures. It is a fairly new term used to describe white public figures who intentionally adopt Black hairstyles, body type, and lips in an attempt to appear Black. It is done by social media influencers, celebrities, even academics. Racial essentialism has defined the Black body as hypersexual and deviant, especially Black women. And within an American pop music, white pop artists have traded in this deviance, especially as it relates to Black women, as a currency to advance their careers. It is important to note that when white pop stars appropriate aspects of Black culture and Black women's bodies that are usually defined as deviant, they do not experience any of the violent repercussions that Black pop stars do. Instead, they are usually rewarded with industry awards and sales increases. I want to add that this goes beyond cultural appropriation. This is a vampiric sucking of Black culture for specific capitalist gain. It is important to point out that for Black women, racial essentialism embodied in Black women's physical experience, physical appearance, such as the booty, lips, and skin color, have had violent and material consequences. For example, in the early 19th century, a Black Persian woman, Sarjit Bartman, was trafficked throughout Western Europe in traveling freak shows where white men and women paid money to view her private parts and her buttocks for their own sick gains. Scholar Janelle Hobson writes, "It is precisely the racial essentialism embodied in the big booty that when projected onto the bodies of non-Black women can racialize these women in similar yet distinct ways, even when our culture's racial hierarchies often relieve non-Black bodies from associations with racial deviance." So contrast that with Kim Kardashian, who is an example of what Scholar Hobson just taught, Scholar Hobson's statement. This is Kim Kardashian's 2014 Paper magazine cover. And in the pic, she poses flaunting her enhanced butt. And the goal, the stated goal of this was to, quote, break the internet. She made millions, but we know this. It is also too important to point out that Black American cultural production is the bedrock of American popular culture. Every aspect is in some way inspired by Black creation, Black people, and Black culture. Today, I want to juxtapose 3 examples of Black women who have faced scorn and ridicule for their expressions of sexual pleasure and independence. Janet Jackson's 2004 Super Bowl performance, Beyonce's 2016 Super Bowl performance, and the 2020 release of the song and video for WAP by Cardi B featuring Megan Thee Stallion. First, Miss Jackson. Janet Jackson began her solo career in 1987. Her debut album, Control, made it clear that she wanted to be in control of her image, her expression, and her sexuality. The Pleasure Principle, a single on the album, was an upbeat dance song celebrating female independence. In the music video, Jackson wears a simple outfit, black tee, black jeans, knee pads. She delivered a solo performance and dance number in a dusty loft that included a backflip. As a young Black girl living in a predominantly white city, during a time when it was rare to see any Black people on TV, I was mesmerized by the beautiful simplicity of the music video, but mostly by Janet Jackson's minimal makeup and direct gaze at the camera. Even though I was too young to really understand that she was singing about enjoying pleasure in a no strings barred context, I was elated to see an image on TV that more closely reflected me and my experiences. For most Black girls and Black women, Janet Jackson and her music represented Black womanhood not often portrayed in pop culture at the time, a strong, beautiful, and also sexual Black woman. This was also a time in the music industry where music genres were racially segregated, and MTV was hesitant to play Black music videos at all. White pop stars, no matter how much they sonically appropriated Black music, played on repeat. So in 2004, Janet Jackson was at the peak of her career. She was a headliner for the Super Bowl 38 halftime show. She started her set off with her 1989 hit, Rhythm Nation, a song about unity and diversity. And toward the ends of that song, Jackson was joined on stage by singer Justin Timberlake, a white cis-male pop star. As Timberlake sang his hit song, Rock Your Body, Jackson danced around him. And at the end of the song, she stood in front of Timberlake. He reached around and ripped off one side of her bustier, exposing one of her breasts and with her nipple adorned with an ornate clamp. Timberlake's performance with Jackson at the Super Bowl was strategic. His proximity to Jackson's Blackness at that moment not only gave him street cred, Timberlake capitalized on racist constructs of Black female sexuality in an effort to move from boy band star to man. Nipplegate, as it absurdly came to be known, meant dire adverse consequences for Jackson. She was fined and even blacklisted from radio and MTV. The incident also led to stricter standards for content on live TV. Even more absurdly, Jackson received nearly all the criticism. From both online trolls to news journalists, Jackson was labeled sexually deviant for showing her breasts on national TV. The FCC's reaction and criticism was also a statement that a Black woman's body was offensive and obscene. Never mind the fact that her fellow performer was the one who ripped off her bustier. Whether or not it was a mishap or intentional isn't really the point. The point is that a Black woman's body was degraded on a national level, and also that Timberlake's career actually took off. He did issue a few blank apologies that actually only helped to affirm racist, sexist ideas that a Black woman influenced him into deviance. In 2016, Beyonce performed her single Formation during the Super Bowl 50 halftime show. Her performance honored Black pride and the 50th anniversary of the Black Panther Party. With fierce urgency and a nod to HBCUs, her performance also centered Black women. Beyonce and her backup dancers were military, utilitarian inspired, all Black berets, Black bodysuits, and Black boots. The lyrics of Formation did more than just lament Black pride in the abstract. With lyrics like, my daddy Alabama, mama Louisiana, you mix that Negro with that Creole, make a Texas Bama, and I like my baby hair with baby hair and afros, and I like my Negro nose with Jackson 5 nostrils. The song and performance spoke of specific Black American experience and the long history of systemic oppression. Her call to formation is past, present, and future, where Black women get into formation like they always have done for Black civil rights organizations. Beyonce demonstrated through performance that Black voices matter. And it's important to point out that Formation was actually just one small part of the overall halftime show. The set closed with Bruno Mars and Coldplay singing along with Beyonce about everybody uniting. But the performance Beyonce's performance, generated swift backlash against her. Conservative media heavily criticized her performance as anti-police, questioned the appropriateness of the performance at a live family-friendly show, and some even labeled it anti-American. The criticism was not just from conservatives. For many white liberals, they rejected her homage to the Black Panther Party as a statement against their support. Infamously mocked in a 2016 Saturday Night Live sketch that satirized the performance as a seminal moment when white people learned that Beyonce was in fact Black. Many widely supported Beyonce's feminist messages in songs like Girls Run the World, Diva, and Rain on It, and Flawless, but Black pride and Black female pride was apparently too much. It's also important to point out that what was not a part of this criticism or the discussion was the fact that this song, the creativity that Beyonce used with mixing the song and incorporating a wide array of Black female artists and poetry and poets into composing the lyrics and the style, that was not, of course, she wasn't given credit for that. So WAP by Cardi B featuring Megan Thee Stallion. Released as a lead single in August 2020 on rapper Cardi B's second studio album, WAP, or Wet Ass Pussy, was at the top of the Billboard charts for weeks. The song sampled DJ Frank Ski's 1993 EDM club mix, Whores in the House. I suggest you listen to it. It's 5 minutes with just that one phrase. The song is explicit. Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion describe their desire for everything from BDSM to cosplay, to sexual pleasure outside of a desire to please a man. The music video featured only women and women across a variety of racial ethnic backgrounds and also body types. And both Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion stare directly at the camera, subverting masculinist attempts at control. The dancing, gestures, and eye contact make it clear that they're not performing solely for the sexual pleasure of men. The criticism lobbied at Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion was not just harsh, it was racist and misogynistic. It came from the usual conservative media types and public figures, but it also came from some of the biggest male hip hop stars. For example, Snoop Dogg, a man who spent most of his career making music with explicit sexual content, who at one point distributed porn, dressed like a pimp, and made a pimp cup the it accessory of the early 2000s. Yes, this man pictured on a MTV red carpet accompanied by two women dressed in bondage gear with dog collars. In response, when asked what he thought about Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's song WAP, Snoop Dogg actually said, "Oh my God, slow down, like slow down, and have some imagination. Let's have some privacy, some intimacy where he wants to find out as opposed to you telling him." He also he also advised women to protect their jewel of the Nile. So to conclude, I want to reiterate that searching for sexual autonomy and agency in Black women's pop music, it moves us away from the reactionary good-bad dichotomies where Black female sexuality as expressed in pop music is only viewed as a reaction against heteronormative constructs, to a more inclusive understanding and also inclusive possibilities for Black pop music and for differing bodies of individuals in Black pop music. Thank you.
Thank you, Z. Oh my gosh, you had me going, what? Wow. Ooh. But I love that, like, this idea that, like, when white women do it, it serves capitalism, you know, that they can make, you know, this is what it was during slavery. You know, we're used and then we're sold and then our babies are sold. And it's just like an update of that. So interesting to come after Max though, or Dr. Berkey. This idea that these forms that we, you know, that are bedrock to America, capitalism, culture, patriotism, democracy, you know, all have a counter narrative coming from Black people. So thank you. So Dr. Francis, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Max and Z. Those were great presentations. Z, since yours came right before mine, you cracked me up, and I need to be very serious right now. Good stuff. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am going to share my screen with you. All right, can I get a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Excellent, great. I'm requesting that you put your screen, put the Zoom screen, put Zoom on a side by side so you can see the slides and you can see me speaking. Side by side speaker or gallery view. All right, so today I'm going to talk briefly, and give you a broad overview, a very broad overview of some of the root causes of the mass imprisonment of Black people in the United States today. I will discuss forces and conditions with which Black people have contended throughout US history and that Black people still contend with today. The title of my presentation, Racism in the Poverty to Prison Cycle. I'm going to focus more, I have time to focus more on the connection between racist beliefs and mass incarceration. So I'm talking about African Americans, mass incarceration, and everyday white supremacy. How does everyday white supremacy drive the mass incarceration of poor Black people? And what exactly do I mean when I talk about everyday white supremacy? Well, part of what I mean, part of what I'm talking about is the everyday racist beliefs, specifically about crime, everyday racist beliefs about crime, mainstream white supremacist beliefs about crime. And these beliefs are accurately called white supremacist because the Klan and every white supremacist in the country and the world will absolutely sign off on the kind of beliefs that many people have, that I think most people have about crime. Everyday racist beliefs criminalize Black people. So Black people are thought of as criminals and then treated as criminals because of how we're thought about. There's a link between racism, economic oppression, and enforced poverty. Sorry, racism, economic oppression, enforced poverty in prisons. And when I talk about enforced poverty, I am saying that poverty is a condition that's imposed on people. Poverty is a condition of reality, structural reality that is imposed on people, that ensnares people. Most poor people will not escape poverty, and no matter how hard they work, no matter how much they want to. Racist classism against poor people of color, racist classism against poor Black and Indigenous people of color drives mass incarceration. So discrimination specifically against poor people of color, and that's what I'm calling racist classism, drives the mass incarceration of poor people of color. Racist classism, I'm going to focus on poor Black people, so racist classism against poor Black people drives mass incarceration. When I say mass incarceration, I'm talking about mass imprisonment. And today, there is a crisis of mass imprisonment. There is a crisis of mass incarceration in poor African American communities. Racist classism is systemic. It's institutionalized. It's built into many institutions, many systems, some of them, just a few of them, systems of policing, the prison system, and the legal system at large. So the legal system is set up in a way, to discriminate. It functions in a way that discriminates against poor people of color. All right, if you have something to write with, use it and grab a piece of paper, and I'm gonna give you maybe 10 or 20 seconds to list stereotypes, the quickest things that spring to mind when you think about poor Black people. When you imagine poor Black people and Black poverty, what comes to mind? What do you think? Or what are the images of poor Black people in broader society? And do the same thing when you think about prisoners. When you imagine a prisoner, what race is this person? Gender of this person? Why is this person locked up? What are the stereotypes of prisoners you have or that circulate through broader society? All right, so most people, when I pose this question, most people say that the stereotypes that come to mind, not necessarily stereotypes that they themselves hold, but the stereotypes of poor Black people in broader society include lazy, irresponsible, don't want to work, have a lot of babies that are poorly taken care of or not taken care of, violent, and criminal. So communities with human beings in them, poor Black human beings in them, communities like the one in Trenton, Newark, Camden, New Jersey. These communities aren't thought of as places, as sites with children, grandmothers, people that love, laugh, struggle, and survive. These communities are often thought of as havens of crime, as domain of criminals. And prisoners are often imagined as Black, and specifically as Black men. Now let's talk about some facts, some realities, and the facts I'm giving you are based on government data, US government data. In this country, white people commit most crimes. Black people do not commit most crimes. White people commit most crimes. Yet Black people are stereotyped as criminal. The typical, by definition, and in fact, the typical criminal is a white person, but Black people are stereotyped as criminal. White people commit most violent crimes. Black men are stereotyped as violent. So again, the typical violent criminal is a white person, and typically, most often a white man, but Black men are stereotyped as violent. So Blackness then, actually just being Black, is criminalized. Blackness itself is criminalized. Black people, again, as I said before, are thought of as criminal and therefore treated as though we are criminals. This guy very well reflects the criminalized thinking, the racialized, criminalized thinking and practices, policies and practices that impact Black people's lives. Former President Trump retweeted these are wrong statistics, false statistics that he pulled from the Twitter feeds of white supremacists. And I'll just point out this one here, where he claims that most white people that are killed, he claims that most white people that are killed by Black people. Completely wrong. And here's some corrected stats, but I don't have time to go over them. Most white victims in every category of crime have white perpetrators. Most white victims of robbery, rape, assault, murder, and so on have white perpetrators. But it is Blackness that is criminalized. When white people are in danger, harmed or in danger, targeted for crime, they're targeted most often by white folks. But there is a widespread fear among white people, and lots of research that shows this, and among people in general, but among white people, there's a widespread fear of the Black criminal, of being victimized by Black people. So how are racist and racist classist stereotypes a factor in mass incarceration? I have one example for you, a crystal clear example. Here we have a news source, online news source, that shows a headline that's talking about the arrest of men for the same crime, the same exact crime, burglary. White news reporters pictured at top, everybody's white. If you look at the one side of the screen, you see what is a high school photo or a college photo of young white men. They look a lot like boys, young white men that are in the headline referred to as students, college students. They're athletes, they're wrestlers, and they've been arrested. Next to that, same news source, Black men, no reference to their jobs or anything else that they have done or who they are outside of having committed, well, allegedly, they've been accused of committing burglary. But what we see is their mugshots. So these images alone, and then if I had a chance to ask you, what do you think? What are your responses? Well, generally, people say that the boys, what look like white boys on the one side, we're encouraged to empathize with them, to see them as innocent. This is a one-time thing. These are not criminals. On the other side, we see these stoic, hardened Black men, hardened criminals, people that are bad and dangerous that should be locked up. And these are the kinds of images that proliferate mainstream United States United States is mainstream. So again, Blackness is criminalized. Whiteness is marked as innocent, often portrayed as innocent. Whiteness is innocent, heroic. When crime is involved, white people are often thought of or imagined as victims. White women in particular are imagined as victims. All right. The economic status, more on mass incarceration. The economic status of most prisoners. Most prisoners are poor. Do most poor people commit crimes? Most poor people do not commit crimes. Most poor Black people, the overwhelming majority of poor Black people, do not commit crimes. Fraction, right? Tiny percentages of poor Black people commit crimes. And yet again, the poor Black communities are thought of as havens of crime and havens of violent crime. Most prisoners are poor. Most prisoners are, this is really important. Most people that are in jail, prison, detention facilities, immigration detention facilities, on the whole, most of these people, most incarcerated people are convicted. They're convicted of non-violent crimes. So the typical prisoner is not a violent offender. It's a person that committed a non-violent crime. I recommend this book. A lot of the research that I'm showing you today has come straight from Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. Great book if you want to learn more about these issues. Mass incarceration. So whites commit most crimes. Whites commit most violent crimes. But most prisoners, most people that are locked up are people of color. Why is that? Most prisoners are men of color. And the largest imprisoned racial group. So most prisoners, most people in jail, most people in prison are not Black men. They're not Black men. They're the largest imprisoned group. About 36% of all prisoners are Black males. So most prisoners are men of color. The largest imprisoned group, Black men. Why? Why is that the case when white people commit most crimes? So specifically, again, most prisoners are people of color, but Black and Latinx people, and yes, those categories overlap. Government counts them this way. Black and Latinx people make up just over 50% of prisoners. White people commit most crimes and most violent crimes, yet most prisoners are people of color. People of color in general and Black people specifically are disproportionately incarcerated. So incarcerated at higher rates, far higher rates than white people. And incarcerated at higher rates for crimes that white people commit more of and commit more often. So one example, racist policing. I want to talk about drug crime, the racist policing of drug crime. Most drug dealers are white. That should say drug users. Most drug dealers are white. Most drug users are white. But most of the people that are locked up for drug crimes, most of the people that are locked up for drug crimes are Black. White youth use and deal drugs, specifically white youth use and deal drugs at far higher rates than Black people of any age. Drugs like crack, LSD, cocaine, heroin, meth, listed there at the bottom. And they do this, white youth use and deal these drugs at 7 to 8 times the rate of Black people. But yet the majority of people that are locked up for drug crimes are Black, and that Black people are locked up at higher rates for drug crime. So why? Why is it the case that most people that commit crimes are white and most of the people that are locked up are Black and brown? Well, 2 reasons. There are 2. One, just 2 of the many: racist policing and racist drug policing. And when I say racist policing, part of what I'm talking about is the over policing of poor Black communities. Black communities are so heavily policed, and white communities are, every economic status of white community is so under policed that we don't actually have we don't have a realistic picture, realistic understanding. We don't have the facts on the rate of crime in white communities and how many crimes white people in fact commit, because white people can commit crime and do commit crimes every day and don't get caught. Their whiteness shields them, protects them, insulates them from policing. I only have a minute here. I'm going to take a couple though. So the largest number of Black people that are arrested, the biggest percentage of Black people that are arrested are charged with nonviolent low-level drug crimes. 40% of them, weed, marijuana. White people and white men mostly commit most violent crimes, most rapes, most assaults. There are 45 million Black people in this country, 45 million Black people in the United States. less than 1%, and to be even more specific, 1/100th of 1% of Black males will commit a violent crime. Yet again, Black men are stereotyped as violent and criminal, gang-banging thugs. 0.02%. 0.02% of Black people will commit murder each year. And Tim Wise, white anti-racist Tim Wise says, how can such a small percentage of the Black population be the basis for widespread over-policing, stops, searches, and harassment? Again, the overwhelming majority of Black people will never commit a crime and will never commit a violent crime. And yet, how are Black folks imagined? Whites are 6 times more likely to be killed by another white person, 4 times more likely to be beaten by another white person. Again, most white victims have white perpetrators. Most crimes are committed by white people, and yet most prisoners are Black and Latinx. Why? Because there is race and gender inequity in the prison system. The prison system is fundamentally racist. It's set up to target and persecute poor people and poor people of color, especially. So the everyday, what we think, there are people that will say sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. Words hurt. The words are attached to thoughts, and the thoughts are attached, they drive practices, right? So what we think, what people think about Black people, about poor Black people, again, that is just penetrated mainstream everyday society. What people think about poor Black people and crime matters, because these racist stereotypes drive over policing and drives the over incarceration of poor Black people. It drives the mass imprisonment then. Racist stereotypes drive the mass imprisonment of poor Black people. All right, so that was quick. In conclusion, the legal system is fundamentally racist. It is horrifically violent. I don't have time to go through those examples. But it's violence enough. When Dr. Williams mentioned Black babies being ripped from Black mothers. Black families are torn apart every day on a regular basis and for generations, right? Stretching back centuries by mass incarceration. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. It's interesting. I think next year when I have that, I'm gonna call this the AAS Think-In, because what we do in African American studies is we think differently, we think critically, we think in ways that aren't the ways we think, counter narratives. So thank you so much for getting even me thinking and writing lots of notes. So now, if you could raise your virtual hand, you'll pop to the top of my screen and I can call on you. Or if you want to put a question in the chat, I'll look at that too. So I know you were offered a lot of information, and so questions. I know our panelists are ready for questions. I see so many faces out there. I know you guys could ask a question. Don't smile at me, Jess, and don't ask a question. Oh, thank you, Dr. Becker, Patricia from Criminology. Unmute. Good.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for your presentations. So I have a question for you, Dr. Francis. So I teach victimology this semester within the Department of Criminology, and I'm curious on how we can apply your presentation when we think about Black female victims, especially if we think about the case of Lauren Smith Fields versus Gabby Petito and the media representations.
So you're asking me about the gross underrepresentation and the gross underrepresentation and the lack of exploration of violent crime, in particular against Black women and girls, and this hyper focus in the media on white women and girls. And so how can you talk? Okay. Well, so Zakiya, Dr. Adair, talked a lot about how, about how Black women are imagined. And one of the ways in which Black women are not thought of, are not imagined, is as victims. And of course, Black women are victims. Black girls are victims and have been historically victimized by white people, by systems of white supremacy. like capitalism, like the legal system. So I would talk about the representation of Black women and girls. And I would start with, what do your students think? They don't have to reveal what they believe. You can talk about, again, what are the images that circulate in society, the images of Black women and the ideas about Black women and girls that are popular in society, popular in this country, and then link that to how little the media pays attention to and how little the media cares about Black women's victimization. White women, again, white women are the stereotypical victim. And when white women are thought of as victims, they're actually not thought of as who they're victimized by. I mean, Gabby Petito, I mean, I knew he killed her. She was killed by her boyfriend, her white male partner. White women are imagined as under attack, especially and in danger from Black and brown men. So I would link stereotypes to media representation and who gets locked up.
I think we can also relate that back to your statistics that white males are most likely the violent perpetrators, because in Lauren Smith Field's case, right, the man that she went on a date with was a white male and he was seen as professional by police. So didn't deserve further investigation until her parents pushed for it. So I think that relates to stereotypes and misconceptions as well.
Look, I mean, we watched that white man, Kyle Rittenhouse, get on the stand after he murdered 3 white people. When is it okay to kill white people? When they're defending Black folks and they're standing up and challenging white supremacy. That's when it's okay to kill white people. That boy got on the stand and cried and was not convicted. Brock Turner, he raped somebody. He sexually assaulted somebody, but he's too good for prison. Steak eating white male swimmer, so he can't go to prison. There's a recent case that it's escaping me right now, but Black folks don't get that kind of treatment, right? Whatever you did, you're going away, right? And the research backs that up.
All right, so my mom is here, and I don't know if my parents used to come to campus all the time. So she has a question. Do you want me to read it, or you ask your question?
Sure, I can ask my question. My question is for you, Dr. Francis. How does the stereotyping of Black people as criminals serve the American project? Is it just a legacy of slavery still going on, or has it morphed into some kind of a key function for some people to get elected, or something else?
So that's an easy question and to answer. And also I know exactly where Dr. Williams gets her genius. Wow. So how does the mass incarceration of Black people serve the American project? There's so many answers to that question, and I know you know it, so I'm going to focus on one. If white people are innocent, then the people who control the government, these are good people with good intentions, heroic, right? The majority, the white men that control the highest levels of government, that occupy the highest seats in the government. And so when the US government declares wars and drops bombs on majority Black and brown countries, majority poor Black and brown countries, we do it to liberate. We do it because these people are bad and these people are terrorists. We're never thought of as the terrorists. White men stormed the Capitol, but still are not haunted, stalked by a stereotype that they're violent, which historically white men have done a lot of violent stuff. Done a lot of violent stuff. Catching myself. So how does it serve? The criminalization, the white supremacist criminalization of Black people supports neo-imperialism, supports capitalism, supports white supremacy in all its forms. White people can do, not all white people do bad things, right? But white people can do bad things. White people can do downright evil things. And it's not seen. It's not seen. And when it's seen, softly criticized, or it's not addressed with the severity that it should be addressed. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. I see Dr. Foster, but I'm gonna ask a quick question in the chat first, then you can be, okay, so Miriam Strackow from Sociology asked, Gabriel McLean, hold on, sorry, Gabriel McLean asked, great presentations. I have a question for Dr. Adair. How can avid music listeners better support Black and/or LGBTQ+ artists?
Hey, thanks. I mean, I think in terms of support, I mean, I think it's complicated, right? I was talking specifically about pop music, and as I mentioned before, it's not simple, right? That the what makes commercial pop music, commercial hip hop sell most often is sort of exploitative. But I think that in terms of support, what I really was wanting to get at is the fact that it is so important for us to look at and try to think about how agency and autonomy, in particular sort of sexual autonomy, how that can occur with Black women. Because I do think that what happens, especially in pop music, is that any time a Black woman is talking about, rapping about, singing about pleasure, whether you might find it grotesque or vulgar or explicit or any of those things, she is automatically, her artistry and creativity are automatically reduced, and sort of her voice is automatically reduced. So we never get out of a dynamic of thinking about Black pleasure outside of the reactionary. So I think that, like I said before, historically, there's some significance and importance to respectability politics as it emerged historically. But we are still in 2022, we are still policing Black bodies, and in particular, Black women, in ways that limit and in ways that demean, so that you have Black artists that are never able to really sort of rise up out of what should be considered sort of the top of their craft. So just as a quick example, for best album of the year for the Grammys, which doesn't mean that much, but it does have some significance. Adele won over Beyonce, and that year was the year that Beyonce produced Lemonade. And Lemonade was revolutionary in a lot of different ways, but it was also one of the most sort of brilliantly complex commercial hip hop short films to be released in the decade. And oh, sorry, I can't see who's talking, so I heard her voice. I was like, what's happening? So I think that it's super important to do that. And I think the other thing, and I wanted to touch on when you talked about how can you support sort of LGBTQ, one of the things I was trying to make clear, and I hope it was, and I hope that going forward it will be, that when we diminish or we continue to insist on policing Black pleasure, that what we do is we also affirm heteronormative constructs that limit pleasure and Black pleasure to a straight, non-straight lens. And so queer bodies, anyone that does not fit, I put the first picture that I put up on my slideshow was Lizzo, and I love it because it's she's posed in a sort of classic sort of artist pose. And I put her up there because it's not just about, can we listen to a song like WAP and enjoy it and talk about its artistry? It is about opening up pop music and opening up text so that it's not only focused on straight, heteronormative, cis-identified individuals, so that we can appreciate, enjoy, dance to, rock, sing along with, get angry about, get passionate about music from bodies that are outside of this. And one of the ways that we do that is by really pushing and challenging when we hear about or when we engage in the over-policing of expressions of Black pleasure, particularly women. And I keep emphasizing this because, like I put up, it was kind of funny, but it really was meant to be serious. There are a number of examples of men who get really sort of acclaimed and a lot of status, like Snoop Dogg, for his artistry, for his rap skill, who have done some incredibly explicit things and what I would consider demeaning and so on and so on. But he doesn't get put in the same box, right? Because he's operating in a sort of hyper-masculine era, hyper-masculine fashion, which is accepted. So I guess what I would say is to sort of like challenge yourselves to engage in text and products from individuals that are sometimes often on the margins and enjoy it, and also provoke conversations, right? And talk about it and push past kind of these sort of basic conversations of, was this vulgar? Was this not vulgar? What, you know, I want to say, well, why? Why do you think it's vulgar, right? Like, why is Black pleasure vulgar? Why is WAP vulgar? Like, those are the conversations that I'm sort of interested in, right? That sort of gut reaction. So that's a sort of long-winded academic way of saying to enjoy it and to push yourself when you feel that something might, you might have a sort of negative reaction to something.
Thank you. So Dr. Foster, and then I'm going to do a question. Hopefully I'll have time for one more question for Dr. Burkey that's on the chat. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And this has been terrific and really, like you, Dr. Williams, a little mind-blowing. So about 2 weeks ago at the start of Black History Month, I told about someone I admire, which is Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. And I think this is going to be a question for Dr. Burkey, but I think Dr. Adair might come in here as well. And Shirley Chisholm, Representative Chisholm, I kind of worked from her autobiography, and I wish I had had the language of counter-patriotism at the time. I wish I'd had the language of, you know, thinking of her in a countercultural way. And I didn't, so I didn't present it that way, but I did present her as someone I admired and someone who I had thought of as a hero during my time and my political formation. So my question, starting with Dr. Burkey, I think, is how do we move from, because I think I heard your argument saying in part, you want to move from heroes, you know, if you will, Black heroes, looking back in history and looking at a Black hero, and move from a Black hero to a Black idea or a Black argument in service to Black justice, Black experience. And so I guess my question is, how do we hold, or how would I hold, what would you advise me to do to hold when I'm looking back and saying, here's someone I admire, I want to lift up her story to people who may not be aware of her. What's your thinking about that in terms of those of us who want to, you know, sort of be, if you will, respectful of a lot of the thinking and the arguments that are there?
Right. Thank you, President Foster, for the question. It is a conundrum, I think, as you're sensing, because as I tried to convey in the talk, the individualist lens of Black achievement is able to accommodate itself rather easily to this patriotic framing of American history. So we kind of, we skate on some thin ice when we lionize individuals just inherently. So I don't have a real great answer, but what we do need to focus on more is the extra institutional or non-institutional parts of American politics. So one of the problems with the idea of kind of America as a story of great ideas in the Declaration, and then the realization of those ideas, is it gives the sense, it precludes a real grappling with those uprisings, movements, organizing that happened outside the sphere of institutional mainstream politics. And this is important because the mainstream institutions tend to be ones that are heavily encoded with patriotic assumptions, patriotic regalia, narratives. These institutions are invested in a larger cultural story of America, where movements often are not, and movements, the first charge they're met with, and the first charge that the abolitionists were met with, and that the civil rights workers and activists were met with, was not a kind of substantive philosophical point or political point about segregation or racial equality, but the charge of anti-Americanism, of being of not believing in the country, right? So that's the first kind of existential question of the activist, of the one who is outside the normal institutions of American life. And the example of Chisholm is interesting because Chisholm was someone who bridged that gap. She was, prior to running for president as the first African-American woman to do that in '72, she had an organizing career that began in Brooklyn, and that tried to bridge the gap between kind of the tradition of extra institutional pressure by African American communities on mainstream American institutions, and then bringing that I kind of think of her campaign in terms of symbolism, in terms of the iconography of American patriotism. And she did too, and I show a film on her in one of my classes, because she knew she didn't have a real good shot at winning, right? So she knew she was doing a cultural project through her campaigning. And so the most interesting point to bridge this gap between the institutions and the extra institutional aspects of politics, which includes movements, culture, narratives, and this, I think, brings in Dr. Adair as well here, who's looking at culture and performance as a space that we need to contest and think critically of, is at one point Chisholm was asked about her relationship to the Black Panthers at the time. And she was pressed in the California primary to disassociate herself from the Panthers. And she didn't. She refused to do that. And she asked the question back to the reporter, why don't you think about why the Panthers have had to exist in America in the first place, right? And by association, she was kind of suggesting why some folks can't press their case through the mainstream narrative of patriotism, right? And so I think that kind of connective tissue there, although there's tension, anytime we elevate a single individual, right? We're not playing on the ground of racial justice when we do that. Even though I admit intuitively it's very appealing and you want to do it, and we do it. But we have to keep both of these lenses together at once. And we have to think of cultural spaces like Black History Month, which we would normally celebrate in a very intuitive way as a good thing. We also have to think of it, as I tried to suggest here too, as not inherently a progressive cultural institution, right? Because it has been framed in ways that marginalize some of the more radical aspects of the Black tradition. And I think that does connect with Dr. Adair's thinking about performance as a space of contestation, a space that creates room for critical agency, like we're doing here today with this teach-in, but also curtails and subsumes, and right. So those are my thoughts. I don't know if Dr. Adair, if you want to jump in on that.
Well, can I pause us 1 minute, because
sure.
we're at 1:50.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know. Do you have to go teach soon, Max?
No, I have no. Well, I do, but I could make it quick. I have about 7 or 8 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to do 2 quick plugs for future events.
Okay.
So one, on the 24th, we have William C. Anderson coming, who has a new book out called The Nation on No Map. So another counter patriotic idea is Black anarchism. So I hope you can join us. That's on the 24th at 5 p.m. Black anarchism. That's coming up. And then I'm just going to read from the chat Professor Janet Gray's comment/question, which is foreshadowing Nicole Hannah-Jones' visit to campus on March 3rd. So I hope you guys can come out to all those things. But Dr. Gray says, for Dr. Burkey, your analysis of Freedom Train seems to me also to shed light on the controversy surrounding the 1619 Project, the dog whistle crackdowns on what can and cannot be taught in schools, but also on the epistemologies underlying debates about the ways that Nicole Hannah-Jones and her colleagues reorient the narrative of US history. I'm not sure I have a question, but can you comment?
Right. Yeah, no, that was kind of hovering over my thoughts as I prepared this, and it feeds well into Nicole Hannah-Jones' visit in March. And I think what's interesting is the way in which these movements, this reactionary movement, I read the piece from Florida, but also if you look at Governor Glenn Youngkin, I believe in Virginia, his recent executive order on this, on critical race theory, on the 1619 Project, they foreground all of these, all this legislation, these executive orders foreground the contributions, to go back to President Foster's inquiry, of individual African Americans and diversity. And they center that and preface, right, this broader project of curtailing the kinds of stories we can tell and the kinds of materials we can look at in schools, by noting that this is not a threat to individual achievement, to diversity, right, to thinking about African American contributions, just as the Freedom Train, looked at Hank Aaron's baseball bat and Martin Luther King Jr.'s ability to mobilize and to inspire. And so again, I think the more complicated to move away from, America's a strange place, right? Because we have a revolution, we're a country founded on revolution, but we look askance at and recoil from and often try to suppress other types of revolutionary activities subsequent to 1776, right? So being able to bring in the sense of an ongoing revolution to American political history and American political thought is the challenge. And that also means moving away from the other dominant strand of American political culture, which is individualism, right? Because these orders, these executive orders and legislation advertise their compatibility with the framework of individual achievement. So thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for coming. I see people are dropping off because it is a day of classes and people probably have 2 o'clock, but we had 107 people here and now we're down to the core 43. So thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up. This is annual. I have this idea. I was inspired by Dr. Hatch coming to campus and meeting with the Black faculty to open up this teach-in to all the Black faculty and then probably the BIPOC faculty, especially junior faculty on the tenure track, to have a chance to share their research with the campus. So just one of the initiatives I'm thinking about as chair. So thank you, everyone. So great to see my mom. Bye. Thank you for coming.